ecosystems are dynamic, so they change. They don't stay the same forever. The succession, or the concept of succession, is what we can use to describe some of these changes that we see in ecosystems over time. Now, there's two main types of succession. We see primary succession, and we can also see secondary succession. Now, based on the environment and based on the type of succession, these could take years, these could take tens of thousands of years. So let's have a look at a couple of examples of succession. So firstly, let's look at primary succession. So primary succession refers to when we see an ecosystem starting out from the most basic form, the most basic preliminary form. So what we can see is in primary succession, new kind of land is formed or exposed. So this could be something like lava cooling to form rock. So let's imagine we've had some lava here pouring out of a volcano. It's been dumped in the ocean and cooled, and now we have this new land mass which has kind of risen out of the ocean, made out of cooled rock. So what's going to happen is, first of all, there is going to be, in this area, there's going to be no real life whatsoever. So we only have rock, we only have abiotic factors, we don't see any life present. The first type of life which is going to be able to get a foothold in this environment is something like lichens. So lichens are going to be able to get a grip or get a hold in this environment at a very early stage, because they require minimal soil and nutrients in order to be able to survive. So what we might see is that rock might get sort of weathered away a little bit by the wind or the rain. It will break down just enough that lichens can get a bit of a foothold in that environment. Then what's going to happen is over time, these lichens are able to break down that rock and grow within that rock a little bit more, until we get, in this stage here, we're starting to see more soil form. And eventually, once we get a bit of soil form, we're able to support grasses, and grasses will start to grow. Again, as grasses are growing, they're going to help break down and cycle nutrients through the ground a little bit more. We get more soil and a better quality of soil. We might be able to support some things like shrubs, until eventually we then see trees being able to form. Now, this process is likely going to be happening over tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years. So plant life is one of the main things that drives this change, but at the same time, what we're going to see is when we've got grasses starting to form or lichens starting to form in this sort of period, we might get some insects forming here, and then over time we might get some reptiles starting to move into and inhabit the area as a result of the insects, the food source. We might also see in this period some small mammals starting to find their way and be able to survive, till eventually we're going to see some larger mammals accompanying the larger trees and this more complex environment that we get. So in these stages where we've got really simple species, we call these pioneer species. There's a few particular characteristics that pioneer species are going to exhibit. So the first of which is they must be, at this stage, autotrophs. So we don't have any heterotrophs, only autotrophs that can synthesize energy from sunlight through photosynthesis. They're going to need to be able to fix nitrogen from the atmosphere. They're going to have rapid reproduction, because they're going to have to be able to tolerate harsh conditions one of their weapons against these harsh conditions is being able to reproduce rapidly when they start to lose numbers. So after these pioneer species, what we're going to see is some grasses and shrubs, and we can term these intermediate species. So we're going to see these when we're starting to get more of a complex ecosystem developing, or community developing. And then finally, when we're getting trees and larger mammals being able to inhabit the area, we've reached what we call a climax community. So a community where we don't see massive fluctuations or rises and falls in species. This is relatively stable. So what can happen in these first few steps? So lichens might start to be overtaken by grasses, and then eventually shrubs may start to overtake the grasses a little bit more. When we get to this climax stage, everything is a little bit more stable and a little bit more able to compete evenly with one another. Let's move down to a second type of succession. So this one is called secondary succession. It's not quite as drastic as primary succession. In secondary succession, we're looking at a scenario where we aren't starting with a brand new kind of source of land being exposed or created. We're starting with a land that has undergone a natural disaster, perhaps, something like fire. So fire has burnt through this community. So what's going to happen is, even though fire has burnt through this community, in the earliest stages after the fire, we're still going to have soils being present. Now, as a result of soils being present, we are able to skip this whole stage where we have no life to minimal life and we have lichens breaking down that rock. We already have soils. So what's going to happen is, not that long after the disaster, we're going to see things like seeds being able to take hold in the soil, and then eventually we're going to see grasses being able to grow. So we see pioneer species being able to take hold and start to grow and reproduce a little bit earlier on. Once again, we're going to move from grasses into shrubs as we get more nutrient cycling inside in that soil and a better quality of soil, and then working towards trees. Very similar as to above, we're going to start to see from one sort of stage to the next, we're going to see animal life increase as we move along, until eventually we go from pioneer species to intermediates, and then finally a more stable climax community. So there you have the two types of succession, both primary succession and secondary succession.